Hello and welcome. My name is Lauren and this is Scouts Honor Redesign. Thank you so much for being here today. We are going to be talking about something that I think is a patriotic thing, women's suffrage in America. And we're going to make a little craft as well. Let's talk about it briefly here. Okay, I'm not going to lecture to you, but let's learn a little bit while we are here. Nowadays, we might take for granted things that they didn't have 100 years ago. One of those things is the right to vote for women, which is called women's suffrage. Women didn't get the right to vote federally until 1920. Hard to believe, but it is true. And I want to honor all of the women who fought for that right to vote. They were treated horribly. They were spit on, beat up, harassed, put in jail. Marriages broke up, families broke up, just because women were trying to protest so that we could have the right to vote. The inspiration for this video came when I found this vase at a thrift store. And at first I passed it by and I didn't pick it up. And then what popped into my head was one of the first musical numbers from the movie Mary Poppins. Sister Suffragette, done wonderfully by Glynis Johns, and she's kicking up her leg, and I don't know, the boot reminded me of that. And then I immediately went into a creative mode of thinking that I could make some sort of suffragette centerpiece, and that is what led us here today. So for this project, I'm going to be using something I thrifted. I got this at a Jubilee Ministries thrift store. We have them here in Pennsylvania. It was $4.99. This, if you can see it, says right here, Atlantic mold. This is what they call, hopefully I'm right, a slip cast mold. Atlantic molds were very popular, especially I think in the 60s and 70s. Usually clay. This one is plaster. This is a Victorian shoe. The first thing I'm going to do is clean this really well. And then I'm gonna paint it black. You know, something simple here. All right, here we go. My idea with this project is to really touch on the suffragette movement. So if you didn't want a history lesson, you're probably going to get one today. This is also a vase. So we're going to do something. I have high hopes for this project. Let me put it that way. The first thing we're going to do is, yes, I cleaned it off. Let's paint it. I'm just going to paint it black. I want to keep it nice and simple. The things that we're going to stick inside will have color to them. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to use the color Coal Black. This is my favorite brand here, Fusion Mineral Paint. This is what she looks like after one coat of paint. I think she already looks better just colored black, right? But we're gonna touch her up a little more, don't you worry. Well, everybody, this boot is made for walking. 3 coats. Did I need to put a third coat on it? Probably not, but I think it ended up looking really, really good. I wanted to get in all these little nooks and crannies around the buttons, and I think 3 coats of paint did it. What I want to do now is I want to touch this up a little bit, embellish it with some gold. If I had wax, like a gilding wax, I would use that. I don't. We're going to use folk art, metallic antique gold, and I'm going to dry brush that on. Here's the trick with dry brushing. Less is more, at least to start. You're going to offload most of the paint you stick on this paintbrush. So I got a nice fluffy paintbrush. I'm dipping it in slightly, and then I am really taking a lot of it off. Just on a paper towel, a piece of paper, whatever you have. And then I'm just going to very lightly brush over all of the raised areas. And we're going to do these buttons. And you might not be able to see this on camera, but I am really liking how this looks. I'm actually going to go over all of it. And again, you can't even tell I have paint on this brush. That's how light you want to do it. And you're just feathering over all of the areas. You can always put more on. You can't take more off. It's like carving a pumpkin. You know, if you make the nose hole for the pumpkin too big, well, you can't make it smaller, can you? So you can always put more on. And we're just going to do all sides of this. And then she'll be done. I think she's looking pretty good. What really kick-started the women's rights movement in the United States was the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. And that took place in July of 1848. It was at that convention that the people present created the Declaration of Sentiments. They modeled this after the Declaration of Independence. In that declaration, it points out and details the inequalities that were happening at the time. It also demands rights like education, property ownership, and the right to vote. It specifically states in there that men and women are created equal. Now, you might know the name Elizabeth Cady Stanton, because she is part of a dynamic duo with Susan B. Anthony. Now, that's the one that most people know when we talk about the right to vote for women. Her name comes up all the time. I mean, she is on a coin. When I think of Susan B. Anthony, yes, I think of women's right to vote, but who doesn't think of, now, if you were watching sitcoms in the 1980s, bosom buddies, Kip and Henry, when they had to dress in drag to live in an all-women's apartment building. That apartment building was called the Susan B. Anthony Hotel. A few years after the Seneca Falls Convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton meets Susan B. Anthony, and then they team up for women's rights. And in 1869, they create the National Woman Suffrage Association. Now, this isn't to be confused with the American Woman Suffrage Association, which was created in the exact same year and headed up by Lucy Stone. They are two different women's rights organizations, but they have very different strategies. One's a little bit more conservative than the other. And eventually, in 1890, those two organizations merge and they become the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Hopefully I got that right. I've always wanted to try making flowers out of mason jar lids. I've seen other people do it. So I have a bag of them here. What you do is you use that as the middle part, and then you'll use a wooden dowel for the stem, which I have a pack there. In my mind, I thought I was going to make 5 of these, and I still can. I only made 2 for the project, though. I'm going to use some Waverly wax, just thinned out with a little bit of water, because I want to make those dowels just look a little bit more distressed and a little bit more aged. This is a trick I got from Linda, from Linda's DIY by Design. So I'm just going to brush these on. I'm just going to brush the wax on, and then I'm going to let it sit for a little bit, and then I'll wipe it back with a towel. You can find videos on how to make these flowers. I wanted to try to figure it out myself because I fancy myself a smarty. Like I said, just grab a paper towel and just wipe it back. I like how I stopped to show off the dowel. Look here, I've done it. Doesn't it look great? So I already had one done from a different project, which is why you only see me doing 4 of them here. even though my intent was to make 5 flowers. And now we're going to move on to the fabric that I'm using, and I'm using these colors on purpose. The suffrage movement had certain colors that they stood for. White was for purity and quality of their purpose. Purple stood for loyalty and constancy. And then, of course, yellow, or sometimes gold, stood for light and life, acting as a torch, guiding their purpose. Sometimes you'll see the sunflower used in suffrage posters and things like that. That was also a symbol of the movement, specifically adopted by the suffragists in Kansas back in the 1860s. So I need strips of fabric to make the petals. And of course, I am playing it by ear. I have no idea what I'm doing here. So let's strip some fabric. At this point, I need to make little notches into the mason jar lid, just the ring part. So I borrowed some tin snips, because of course I didn't have that. And I went about making a notch, because if you can see here, I want to try to be able to fit the wooden dowel into the notch so that it sits flat against the back of the lid. And I'm just using a pliers to try to make sure that it's not sharp there. And then I go about making those. Now, I figured out that if I put the lid upside down before I made the knot around it, it looked a little nicer. I have no idea what the name of that knot is. I'm sure it has a name, but we all know what it is. You stick it around the ring and then you pull it through. And then I'm just gonna do this alternating colors of those 3 fabrics that I have. I realized that the fabric was just way too long, making the petals too long. So here I am, giving the okay sign. I made them I think I made them 12 inches. And later on, I decide that's still too long. I ended up going with 9 inches long. And they're probably about 3/4 of an inch wide. I really ripped them randomly. Sometimes I get into a creative mode and I think I know better than, anybody else out there, which is what was happening today. But sometimes going into a creative mode is fun. And that's what I was experiencing with this project. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm going to apologize. This camera angle is terrible. I must have hit the camera mount and didn't realize it. And then I have finished. See how it's just way too long, those strips of fabric? I fix it later at the end. Now I'm going to concentrate on the middle part. And I got these buttons off Amazon, and they are suffrage buttons. And I thought that would be neat to put in the middle, especially the one about the 19th Amendment. Because most people don't know all the amendments. I don't know all of them. I know what the 19th means, though. I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this? How do I get it stuck in the middle there? And I got out my handy dandy tin snips again, and I just ripped the pin part off the back. I'm using some E3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 to glue it with a little bit of hot glue. And I stuck it right on the mason jar lid. And then I just, with all my might, shoved it in there. I attached the rod on the back, and that was what that notch was for that we cut. And I glued that same way, both ones, one for a quick set, one for a permanent set. And then I thought, well, the back looks weird. And so I had some drop cloth. I just cut a circle out of it, and then I glued that on the back just so it looked a little bit more finished. I hate when the backs of my projects look yucky. Again, what would we do without hot glue? More hot glue. And look at that, Bob's your uncle. I have a suffragist flower. I'm just putting a little glue there in the front so you can't see the mason jar lid ring. And then I made a second one. And that's the one I think came out the best. That one I used 9-inch strips for. But overall, I think the project came out really well. And I think they look nice. And now I have stuff to make 3 more flowers, which I will make with some other fabric that goes with the summer theme. And figure out how to do the middles on those. I like it. Thank you so much for being with me today. I really do appreciate it. If you liked what you saw here, please hit the like button. And if you didn't, hit it anyway, because I could use the likes. That would be great. Please make sure to subscribe, because that helps me out a heck of a lot. And I will see you in 2 weeks.